And Celtic extended their lead at the top of the Scottish Premiership thanks to their 2-1 win at home to the 10 Men of Aberdeen. That's the latest. I'm Tanya Snuggs.
This is the Fright Before Christmas. Get in touch now. Email us at studio@hcrfm.co.uk.
He began his research in 2002 and had a website called ILF. He seeks out witnesses, makes documentaries, and from Bridlington, he's here right now. Paul Sinclair, how are you?
I'm great, thank you, Paul. And it's good to be here again. I think this is third time, isn't it?
It is, third year in a row, and you're a popular guest. What can I say?
Well, thank you. I think... I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, but must be doing something right.
Well, I think that's the thing, is that you do seem to know what you're doing, because you're doing all the right stuff. You've made some excellent documentaries this year. We were watching one the other day called The Benton Phenomenon, and funnily enough, you texted me just as I was watching it, so I sent you a picture of it and scared you half to death. And so it's good stuff. I mean, what else have you got in the works as far as documentaries are concerned?
As far as documentaries are concerned, and Chris Turner, who's worked with me on that documentary, he's put the documentary together. I can't take credit for putting it together, although I've done some of the filming for Bringing Down the Light, which we released this year. And this coming year, early into the year, we've got quite a few first-hand witnesses to some new accounts that we will be putting into the documentary. We have a title for it. It's called The Superluminal.
Wow. Okay.
If nobody's ever heard of what it means, it does actually mean beyond consciousness, or above the realms of consciousness, or the threshold. So I think it's a fitting title for the subject that we're sort of all immersed in.
So is that a name that you've come up with yourself, or is that
a
word that actually exists?
No, it's a real word.
Wow.
I've come across it while I was, writing The Night People, the book about my own experiences. And I thought, wow, what a word, and we've got a title.
I like it. So you live in the area of Bridlington. Is it East Yorkshire?
It's East Yorkshire. I'm actually stood in North Yorkshire today in an unfamiliar office at my daughter's business because we're babysitting. Not that the listeners need to know that, but I've got... Just hit me with any question you want, Paul.
No, that's grand. What we'll do, Paul, if it's okay, we'll just go over some very basic stuff so that those who haven't heard you before get an idea of what you're all about. So much of the stuff that you report on is in the Benton area, which is that just north of where you live?
It is. It's Benton. It's eastern North Yorkshire. Most of the things that I'm sort of looking into, but you'll be correct. It's an area, to coin a phrase, of high strangeness. It's a fabulous area, Benton, and it's nothing unique or new to Paul Sinclair. The things that have been happening in this area have probably slipped under the radar for probably hundreds of years, because of the things that I've found in archives, in old newspaper archives, old Coast Guard logs and lifeboat logs that show that these anomalies have been presenting for that long without an answer. So, it's a fabulous area. I'm fortunate to be in such an area, having the interest that I have.
And it's not just aerial phenomena that seems to go back in time either. I think certain areas around there are known for werewolf sightings as well.
That's correct. I'm probably about half a mile from where I'm actually sat now, in Flixton. There's the stories that go back, once again, decades and decades, hundreds of years, of the Flixton werewolf.
Yeah.
I'm keen to say that I never actually thought, people would get sick of me saying this, that I'd ever researched such a thing, because it's not something I thought could possibly exist. But after you've spoken to first-hand witnesses, all from different walks of life, who all claim to have seen something resembling a werewolf, for want of a better word, and point of reference would be something from a horror film, you have to start thinking, is there some truth to this? And they're fabulous accounts, good witnesses, not just a group of people that have got together and they're shining torches around in the woodland, imagining that they're seeing things and mistaking the eyeshine of foxes and deer. People are actually seeing something highly unusual.
It is an area that seems to present with more than its fair share of phenomena as well. I don't know whether that's because people are more attuned and pick up on it more than they do down south. I don't know, but do you think that particular area is in some way more special?
I think there's places like that probably all over the UK. Maybe the area's been highlighted because I'm such an avid researcher. You know what I mean? That could be the reason. I've termed these areas, not just particularly eastern North Yorkshire, multi-phenomena areas, Paul, because we don't just have sightings of UFOs, objects, unidentified objects or light forms, which is what you touched on earlier, the ILF UFO website, which was intelligent light forms. We've got big cat sightings, which, as everyone knows in the UK, big cats aren't native to the UK. But in these multi-phenomena areas and little sort of unique locations around eastern North Yorkshire, they're sort of famous for black cat sightings, puma sightings, and obviously we've got the sightings of the cryptids. It just seems never-ending. We've had unusual sightings the last few weeks, not necessarily of big cats, but nevertheless unusual.
Could you give us an idea of what some of those sightings are?
Well, I spend a lot of time up on those cliff tops at Benton, and I've got some brilliant people who go up there with me. It's not just all about me. Bob Brown spends a lot of time up there, a cryptid researcher. Colin Keelty's been there, Steve Ashbridge, Andy Ramsden, and a massive amount of help from Digital Creations. And we've all been up there and experienced things. But on the 10th of the 12th, 19, 3 guys travelled a considerable distance. They'd been before because of a missing time experience that they'd had at Benton. And the names are Rick, Craig and PJ. You'll have to forgive me, PJ, if you're listening to this, because I don't actually know his name. Everybody calls him PJ. Now, as I previously touched on, they'd had a missing time experience in 2018, but they came up on the 10th, which is not long ago. It was a horrendous night, and I told them to come to my house first and have a warm drink, and out of decency, me and Bob Brown, decided we'd go onto the cliff tops with them, but not to stay all night. These guys are travelling a long way, and they're sleeping in the car or having a break in the car, and they're staying all night. Well, we went up there, and we're on the cliff tops. We've found a vantage point, and there were a bit of rain. It was horrible, but the rain abated. But about 9 o'clock, Bob stood up, and I knew that was his signal. He wanted to go. Well, I was quite happy because I spend an unhealthy amount of time, Paul, on those cliff tops, both alone and with other people. So we said we'd head back. Well, the guys, Rick, PJ and Craig, they said, well, we'll come with you, and what we're going to do, we're going to travel about 15 miles up the coast to Caton, and we're going to observe the coastline of Scarborough and Speeton from a good vantage point that I told them about. We'd looked on a map. And we intend to come back to Benton after midnight. So they walked along with us, and we got to the man-made path that leads up to the RSPB, the bird sanctuary, an asphalt path, and we was about halfway up the path, and probably 100 yards from us, in a small strip of, I'm not even going to call it woodland, just a hedgerow, a monstrous electrical red flash punched up from the ground. Are you getting this, Paul? Can you hear me okay?
I'm with you, mate. I'm just listening.
I heard a click online. I didn't know whether we'd got disconnected.
The noise, there's some noise at your end. It's a bit crackly, but I don't know whether that's weather or whether your phone's being tapped again.
Oh, I'm not that paranoid. I don't think I'm that important. But this light was more maroon than sort of your typical red. Very bright. It was the shape of a kite. Now, what's good about this, there was 5 of us there on the path. 4 of us saw it. PJ didn't. He must have been looking in other direction. We all agree it came up from the ground. Now, is this UFO-related, cryptid-related? No. But it is an example of something highly unusual happening in that area. It looked to be probably about, 10 foot wide and 20 foot deep, and it filled the area of trees. I could see a black bar inside it, and I did speak to Craig tonight, actually, and I asked him if he said he could see anything, and he said that he thought he could see sort of dark striations inside this light. Well, it punched into life for about a second, and then just simmered down, a bit like lightning would in a cloud. Now, we were only 100 yards from this, and for the listeners who won't be familiar with the area, we need to stress that it's absolutely devoid of anybody. It's desolate. There's no street lights. There's no access for cars, apart from the RSPB car park, which is nowhere near that. So we went straight to the area. We searched it. Powerful lights, nothing. Just one example of an unusual sighting. Now, I think it was August of this year, August the 7th to be exact, a police officer was up on those cliff tops.
Are you there, Paul? Okay, we've lost Paul for a moment, and we'll try and get him back, so bear with us, and let's get the microphones open for a second. Well, it's never suspicious when that happens, is it? You suddenly talk about his phone line being tapped and it gets cut off.
You're listening to The Fright Before Christmas with Gledders on HCR104fm.
Well, we do like a bit of bizarreness, don't we? High strangeness indeed. It's exactly 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. You're listening to HCR104fm and The Fright Before Christmas. We do it once a year, and we try and cover what's happened in the last year. And tonight, as ever, we have an excellent guest. Paul Sinclair's on the line from Yorkshire. And Paul, that doesn't make you feel a little bit paranoid at all, does it?
Well, I don't know what happened there, but we're back. I was talking, and I don't know what point we got to. I think I was talking about a police officer sighting.
You were, just after you said about the police officer, we got cut off.
Right. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah, if you would, please.
Well, this guy has an avid interest in the unexplained, I think from an experience whilst working as a police officer, and obviously I don't think he's talked about it to many people, particularly not at work, but once again, he'd travelled from quite a distance. He'd been up to the cliff tops at Benton and Speetons several times before contacting me. And I think it was the third time that he went up there, he had a strange experience. And his initial email, I can remember what it said. It said, "It is with some trepidation that I'm contacting you." I think in view of his job and the fear that his identity could get divulged, but it won't do. And I've got the date. It's August the 7th, and it's 2019. And it arrived at the RSPB car park at approximately 10:45 in the evening.
Right.
Really brave guy, this. I mean, I'm thinking twice about walking about up there on my own in view of some of the stories that I've heard, particularly this year, cryptid-related. It's when you've got first-hand witnesses telling you things and it's frightened them to death, it sort of makes you think. But, right, back to the story. He walked down to the cliffs and hovered around at one of the viewing platforms for 10 minutes or so, and then carried on walking along the cliffs northbound. He wanted to reach Speeton, which would be the highest point there at about 420 feet. And there's a concrete post, a trig point, and that's where for some reason he wanted to get to that. And he walks like a train, I must admit. He's 46-year-old, I'm 57, and I've been a few times, and we've done all-nighters now and not experienced anything. However, I have to tell this guy to slow down. So just an outline of him. He's a fairly fit guy. So he's walked past the old RAF base, and he's carried on towards Speeton. He finds himself at this concrete post with it's got a little brass plaque on it, and he's looking at it, he's squinting down, and he's got a torch with him. Not a particularly good torch. I think it said its range were 100 to 150 yards at its maximum. Not an expensive one. And as he's looking at the post, he can see looking towards Scarborough, probably about 25 miles in the distance.
So a clear night.
Yeah, very clear night. Yeah, a helicopter. No noise, because obviously in that distance, and we're 25 miles away. But he can see that, so he's what I'm saying, keen to point out. He can tell the difference with things that he's looking at. And then he turns and looks down the path where he's just walked, and there's no fence at Speeton, bearing in mind, so he's very close to the edge of these cliffs, and it's just a dirt path with fields either side. Sorry, a field to the right-hand side, and probably 10 to 15 foot of rough, uneven grass to the edge of the cliffs, which are a sheer drop. You don't climb down these cliffs. Just above the grass, probably 18 inches high, he claims that suddenly a figure of 8, a number 8, once again very red, maroon, number 8 coloured object appeared on the path. It's as bizarre as you're going to get. We're not talking about structured UFOs or aliens here, which have been talked about up at Benton.
What kind of size are we talking, Paul?
He said that these things looked about the size of, from what he was looking at them, probably like a large car headlight
right
on top of each other, but quite defined. They're not throwing any light out, and they're very, very bright, which is another example of the lights that we're seeing up there. A lot of people comment on how bright these things are and how little light that they throw out, which is unusual. He said there was a dark band around the middle of it, it was almost like a belt pulling it in that gave it this figure of 8 sort of appearance. He reached for his torch, but before he could put his hand on the button to press it on, the figure of 8 lights went off. Immediately they were replaced by 3 which he says the brightest LED-type lights he's ever seen, and that's what he described them as, looking like brilliant LEDs,
right,
but not illuminating the area. They were evenly spaced out, but the middle one was slightly higher. This time he managed to keep the torch beam on them, but they were at the very fringes of the torch beam. It's out its limits, and he estimates he looked at these lights for about 8 seconds. Then they just vanished. Now, he thought, and he was adamant, he's going to solve this. He wants to solve it. He's not looking for UFOs and things. He's doing what we all do as good researchers, I think, and trying to find out an earthly explanations for these things before we start looking at the unearthly. So he said, I set off running. He said, I was sure I was going to come into contact with something or someone. He said they were only about 100, 150 yards away. And he carried on running. He said, I think it took him, 30 to 40 seconds, maybe a bit longer, to reach that point. Bearing in mind, people, it's very late at night. I think he said it were about 12:30.
And he's very close to the cliff edge as well.
He's on a cliff edge, and there's a narrow path. I'm not going to say it was sludgy because I've no idea if it was or it wasn't. He carried on running. He reached the point, there's nothing there. He said, from there I ran all the way back to the car park. Not in fear. He genuinely wanted to bump into somebody or something. He were absolutely perplexed. And he got back to the car park, I think, about 10 to 1. Nothing there. Jumped in his car and then sent me the email. We've since met 2 times up there. He's been up there once while I've been up, and it weren't an arranged meet, and we've spent all night up on those cliff tops. We've had one strange experience very close to where this triangular, this kite-shaped light punched into life on the 10th with Rick and PJ and Craig. And it was nothing as such, but we were walking down the path. Once again, we'd literally just started the night, and above the abandoned RAF base, above the concrete buildings, which are just derelict shells with no windows or anything, cows use them to shelter in now.
Yeah.
An oblong blue-white light just lit up and switched off. We both stopped. We both said a few swear words, and his exact words were, "Do it again," and nothing happened. And that's his sighting. That's his experience up there. Nothing earth-shattering, I realise, but it's just an example of the unusualness of the area.
It is. I've got a question for you, Paul.
Yeah, fire away.
In relation to, you were saying that he wasn't scared. Now, I think I would be. And, you go up on those cliffs often at night on your own. And we were having a conversation in the studio in the hour before you came on, and we were talking about how an area can freak you out a little bit. Do you ever sense any sense of foreboding up on those cliffs at all, ever?
Well, not in the daytime, but in the night time. And I think we've got to be careful, Paul, that we don't let the stories influence how we feel, because obviously it's going to impact a little bit on us. There's a paratrooper on, I can't remember exact date, but early this year, I think it was February the 7th this year, were up there with another guy, and they were wild camping, and they claimed to have seen something resembling a werewolf. Now we've got the recording of this guy. I think you've probably heard it.
I think I have, yeah.
And he's frightened. And
is he the gentleman who has the tattoos on his neck? I just want to make sure.
No, the guy who's got the tattoos on his neck is Tom Quinn. He's a trawlerman.
Right. Okay.
This is a guy called Rob. I don't know if you want me to say his surname. I think I have
that's
said
fine.
it. But the point is, he's in contact with me every day. He's turned this guy's head upside down. He said, I've patrolled Bogside in Northern Ireland. I've been to Iraq. He said, but this was off the scale of anything I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah.
Now, Paul, with these people, all these individuals who don't know each other from Adam are either lying or there's some reality to what I'm talking about, because in most instances now, I know some of the witnesses don't want the names using, like the police officer, but I'm pretty sure Rob actually would let me use his name because he's allowed me to use the recording.
Okay.
We used it on The Awakening when we sort of, I was going to say premiered, but it makes it sound too important really, but when we first showed our Bringing Down the Light documentary, and Rob's taped account of what he saw on those cliff tops is in the documentary. You know, and these guys, Rick, PJ and Craig, they're real people. Bob Brown will vouch for that. There's a guy been coming up onto the cliffs with me recently who's an absolute first-class witness, and Lee Hayward, they call him. And what a fabulous guy. I've met loads of good people through this, but in this man, I think I've met a friend for life. But we was up there on the 14th of November.
Yeah.
Now, I think, Paul, Lee went up there to try and solve the mystery. He's a bit of an aircraft buff, and he knows everything that's in the sky, and he's got people in the military, friends, who will tell him what's in the sky at any given time. And he'd heard us talking about this, and there was nothing derogatory. I mean, he'd got an avid interest, but I think he actually thought he were going to solve it. And we went up there. We'd been up a few times with nothing happening, and on the 14th of November, 2019 once again, so not long ago, I picked him up and we drove along Cliff Lane, and that's his real name. This guy's on Facebook if anybody wants to look him up. He actually, what he saw on the 14th he's written about, and I've put on the Truth Proof page. So Lee won't mind me mentioning his name. It's his words. I've not influenced him. And this is how good he is. At 6:08 p.m., as we're driving along Cliff Lane, which is the lane that leads to the bird sanctuary and leads to the cliffs of Benton and Flamborough and Buckton, remember that when you're going up this lane, you're not going nowhere else. The road leads nowhere. If you carried on, you'd end up in the North Sea.
Yes.
One solitary orange light lit up in the sky. Didn't fly from anywhere. It just appeared, came to life. It lasted approximately 3 seconds and then just switched off. Now, I saw it first, and I pointed it out to Lee. We're still in the car driving, and I said, that's an example of what we're calling the light forms. And he's looking at it, and he did for the few seconds and sort of perplexed. 6:45 p.m., we're on the cliff tops. He estimates about 12 miles out to sea, and I wouldn't argue with him. Another one lit up for a few seconds. And I've got cameras on the cliff tops here, Paul, but there's that much moisture in the air, there's a towel over them.
Okay.
You can't... The camera's a few £1,000, but in the grand scheme of things, you need to be spending thousands and thousands and having batteries that will last for hours and hours. So I have to.
Do you leave the camera out, or do you monitor
it's out on a tripod, but I've got to take the towel off and flick it into life.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's only lasting a few seconds and it's off. Then at 6:56, same position, two appear. Just switch on. There's no sound of aircraft. He's gone on. He's checked flight radar and various other things and spoke to people before he's come out to check what's in the air, because he genuinely, I'm repeating myself, wanted to solve the problem.
Yeah. Switched
off. Now we're looking out to sea and quite pleased that we're seeing this phenomena appearing, be it man-made, natural, or totally unexplained. It's happening. Now behind us, there's a hillside. Now I'll get to the story of the hillside from 1998, where the rock angler said he saw a spaceship land, his own words.
Okay.
I think I've told you about that once, I'm not sure, but behind us there's a hillside. Now I just looked behind me. Lee's looking as well, and probably 400 to 500 yards in front of us, lighting the ground up below us, 3 huge orange lights lit up in the form, if you picture 3 snooker balls, the formation, looking at them, the 3 as a triangle, over the hill. There was a big haze, a big orange haze around these lights, and the land below them was glowing. I picked the camera up on the tripod, swung it round, and this thing was imploding as I was doing it. Now, Lee got a better sighting of it than me because I was trying to get it on film. I'd have just loved to have got some frame captures to put my money where my mouth is, basically. The only thing I've got is a first-class witness who was with me, an independent who saw this. So that's just another example of what's been seen.
It does leave you speechless. Actually, I listen, and it's not just one person or a couple of people saying that they've seen things. This is a constant stream of people who witness things up there. Sometimes you're involved, sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's historical, sometimes it's bang up to date. And it just leaves you without words, Paul.
It's never ending, but I must stress to anybody listening here, anybody who wants to come up and look for themselves, by all means do, but there's 24 hours in a day, I always say this, and we're only there for a snapshot of it, so we're not seeing things all of the time. You're getting a pick of things, luckily, that have been seen, the 14th of November sighting,
yes.
The 10th of the 12th. But earlier this year, a Flamborough resident who's lived in Flamborough, I think he told me, 16 years, and his name here is Dave Barker. It's not a made-up name. He lives in Flamborough. Great guy. Contacted me. Obviously, people contact you or me or any other researcher after they've had an experience that sort of tipped the head upside down a little bit. And he said on the 20th of March 2019, he didn't know the date the time, but we've found out now. I managed to sort of do a bit of digging and point him in the right direction, and we've got the exact date and time. He was driving home from Bridlington to Flamborough. Midpoint, when he's reached Danes Dyke, which is the old Neolithic earthworks that splits Flamborough from the mainland, or attempts to split Flamborough, he said him and his wife observed a huge white light in the sky, low down, and they assumed it was the searchlight of the helicopter, something like the Sea King or the search and rescue helicopter. So it was stationary, but they didn't think too hard about it. That's what they thought it was. He drove home, probably another 10-minute journey, and pulled his car into the drive, and as he's looking down his drive, he's actually looking in the direction of the Flamborough Lighthouse.
Right.
His wife's gone in, he said, and suddenly a huge white to yellow light lit up in the sky. Silent. He's close enough to the Flamborough Lighthouse to know, and we're not insulting people's intelligence here. These guys live on the coast. They know if they're looking at a helicopter or listening for the sounds of different things, or if it's a flare. And he's puzzled. And then another one lit up. He's thinking, this is odd. I've never seen flares like this. What am I looking at here? As big as the searchlight from the helicopter. So anybody listening who's ever seen the police helicopter with the dragon light on will know what I'm talking about. It's that intensity. But they're not casting a beam. They're just lighting up. So then suddenly he said there's 5 and they look like the face of a dice as I'm looking at them.
Right.
In the sky. And then they're going out in sequence. And then they're going on in a line. And there's a line of 10. And this continued in different formations, and he's watching this and can't work out what's happening. And then at one point, a small silver ball came from one of them, and there's a good gap between them, and moved along the sky and went into the other one.
Good
Eventually
grief.
he thought, Christ, I've got to let my wife see this. So he went inside and shouted her to come and have a look. And when she came out to look, they'd gone. There was nothing there.
Right.
So he rang 101. Told them, he said, I don't know if there's some kind of military exercise going on. He says, I can't hear anything, and these things are close. They're only on the edge, or perceived to be just on the edge of the cliff close to the Flamborough Lighthouse and between a place called Thornwick Bay. He said, or if they're a new type of flare, he says, I've never seen anything like them. So they took his details, and about 10 minutes later, the Coast Guard rang him, and he explained what he'd seen. And he asked if there was a military exercise or anything going off out at sea, and the Coast Guard told him there was nothing happening out at sea, no military exercises and no ships or anything in distress. So they ruled it out, which was good for Dave. So Dave gave me this, and I he didn't know an approximate date, so I got him to contact his phone provider because he wouldn't have made many 101. It is 101, isn't it? Calls.
It is, yeah.
He got the call. It was 8:30 p.m. The Coast Guard called him back 10 minutes later. Now, I put a Freedom of Information request in to the MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. I gave them the details. I didn't tell them the name, but I gave them the 20th of March and everything that they needed bar the name. And they wrote back to me and asked me if I could be more specific, which is amazing, isn't it? How much more? It led me to believe that a lot of people had seen this thing, but it transpired because I actually got their Freedom of Information request back just probably last week. It took a lot longer than the time period that they should respond to, which is ridiculous when you consider that log is fairly recent and fresh, and they could have got that information. But the log basically states what I'm talking about, and the witness, they went out to investigate. They spoke to the witness. They don't believe that they were flares, and the log's called unusual lights out at sea. And it just begs the question, what are we looking at? Because at the end of the Coast Guard log, it says, false alarm with good intent. Yeah. Now, this is the thing, Paul, that in the lifeboat logs and the Coast Guard logs that I've noted throughout the decades. When you're looking in these logs, you're not finding hundreds and hundreds in every year, but you are finding reports of lifeboats being sent out to look for ships in distress or aircraft that potentially could have come down because MOPs, members of the public, have reported seeing unusual lights out at sea. And in some instances, there's been 9-hour call-outs and multiple lifeboats searching for these things. And the actual crews of the lifeboats have seen them, and the actual Coast Guards have seen them. So something very real exists.
Well, that's something that I'd like to come back to. We're going to take a quick break. Yeah. And I'll talk to you about the lifeboats just afterwards, if that's okay.
Yes, by the way.
Just bear with me and hold the line, please, Paul.
You're listening to The Fright Before Christmas with Gledders on HCR104fm.
And on the phone, still there, we have Paul Sinclair. You there, Paul?
I'm there, yeah.
You know, I didn't turn you down, actually, so it's a good job you didn't sneeze or anything during all of that. So where were we? Right, so we were talking about lifeboat crews and the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
Now, I appreciate you're going through the logs there, and they say, call in good faith, unexplained lights, etc. Have you had conversations with Coast Guard or lifeboat crews where, off the record, they've spoken to you about what they've seen? I have, yes. I have, and quite a few of them, lifeboat and Coast Guard. The Coast Guard are more reluctant, I think, so they signed the Official Secrecy Act. That could be part of the reason, but yeah, I've spoken to Coast Guards, and they say at times they've had glasses or binoculars on these lights as they're being reported and been looking out to them, looking out to see at these lights. And an unusual thing that one of them told me was, bearing in mind, as I've stressed it many times on the radio, from those cliff tops you're looking between 20 and 22 miles to the horizon, depending on where you are. But they can't tell whether these lights, when they're looking at them, are 2 miles out or 22 miles out. It's because they're not emitting a light like a flare would, or like the lights on the horizon of the trawlers and the ships that are passing by. These things are just vibrant and bright, but there's, for want of a better word, they're in a bit of a world of their own because they're just doing what they want. And they're not flying in most instances, they're just switching on, punching into a multiple of 4 or 5 and switching off. And the lifeboat guys have seen them and commented, and they don't know what they are. These agencies are brilliant. Without doubt, they're fabulous agencies, both Coast Guard and Lifeboat, and they do a brilliant job. I don't think they're deliberately deceiving us, but we're actually talking about something, Paul, that existence is not acknowledged. Its existence is denied.
Therefore, we can't put anything down in a Coast Guard or maritime coast or a lifeboat log other than false alarm with good intent.
Yeah.
But it's an insult to intelligence when these boats have been out looking for these ships in distress or potential downed aircraft, and nothing's ever found. We know in some instances, obviously, there's flares fired up, and there's a genuine call out, and that's the log reflects that. But in amongst these reports, for most years, for most decades, you've got these false alarms with good intent where people, lifeboat included, Coast Guard included, have all seen the phenomena.
Yeah.
It's real.
And I think there's there a reluctance, Paul, to put down in writing what they've seen to a great degree? I
would think so. Yes. And I've also spoken to a Coast Guard. It's good. I don't know the exact wording that he gave me. But he said to me, "You will never, ever, ever find anything on a Coast Guard log." Now, this Coast Guard, I'll not reveal his name, but he's spent a lot of years in service. He's got an OBE. He says you'll never find anything relating to anything unexplained phenomena or UFO-type sighting ever. He says we are trained in on what not to say.
Yes, and I think no doubt they come into the same position as your friend there, the police officer, who, perhaps doesn't want ridicule from others, doesn't want sort of inquiries from above as to what are you doing writing this down, because I'm guessing that if they reply to any inquiry with, well, I was brought up to tell the truth and the integrity is not to be negotiated, I wrote down what I saw, and they then call into question from above, well, are you seeing things or whatever? But
it's very true. A former lighthouse man at Flamborough gave me an envelope with not a thick envelope, but quite a few reports of unusual objects that he'd seen whilst a keeper, and he was keen to stress I was a keeper, not a lighthouse man. He would back from the old days.
Well, they were very regimented lighthouse keepers.
He worked at Orford Ness as well, on leave, close to Rendlesham, and he's got some interesting stories there to tell me. But, these reports of a spaceship landing not next, but very close to the RAF base at Bempton, a spaceship. This is the terminology we've got to understand, looking back to the 1970s, and it's all talking about a spaceship landing on the fields on the top of Flamborough Head. Now, the reason I find this one really interesting is because the former butcher at Flamborough, and I wish I could remember his name, Dean Bolton, told me that when he was a schoolboy, 1970, early September 1970, he went to look at landing traces where a spaceship had landed on the cliff tops at Flamborough Head. Now, we know people. I'll not dwell on XS894 because I talk about it probably too much.
Is that the lightning
that allegedly were pursuing the UFO, and the pilot came to a tragic end. Whether it was UFO related or not, I can't say for definite. My gut feeling is it was. But what I've found to pack around this story are these reports of a spaceship landing on the cliff tops at Flamborough Head in September 1970. That was September the 8th that the lightning went down, and a few other anomalies occurred around that. But there's so many stories connected with the area, but I think up until me highlighting them with the Truth Proof books, nobody had really realised just how prominent this particular coastline is, because it really is. It's as prolific as anywhere in the world. But, who connects a big cat sighting with a UFO sighting, or the strange lights in the sky with other occurrences that are happening in the area? We have got no proof, Paul, that the cats are somehow connected to the UFOs any more than we've got the strange disappearances of people could be connected to any of these unexplained events that I'm talking about. The only key is the location. The location is the key, and these things are happening. I'd be the last person to say that I think A is responsible for B, but there's got to be some common thread or something that none of us are getting that is linking it all.
No, indeed, and I think perhaps other people have an interest in it, even perhaps from a position of authority. You had those strange military trucks that were up there, not this year, was it? I think it was last year.
They've been there this year, and they've been at a place called Aldborough down the coast this year, and I don't know why.
Well, Aldborough's very close to my stomping grounds. I know Aldborough very well.
Right.
And of course, that's just up the spit from Orford Ness, where lots of Cold War.
We've got an Aldborough in East Yorkshire, just further down the coast.
Okay.
All right. That's one interesting one, and I think it was from the 16th of September. I don't have the date in front of me. I went on to this isn't paranormal as such, but I think it's intimidation. I went on to the cliff tops with Bob Brown, and we walked along the cliff tops, and probably 500 yards in the distance, not even that, there's a black Range Rover Vogue. Now, the pretty distinct shape of the Vogue, and it was a new one, on the cliff top, on the hillside, not on the cliff tops. We're on cliff tops, sort of pacing us as we're walking along. Now, it shouldn't have been there. It had got blacked out windows, it was getting dark, and there were no lights on. So I rang one of the farmers who lives fairly close, and I said, look, we've got this vehicle here. I said, I don't know whether you've got anybody up there. I mean, I wouldn't have thought anybody in such a smart vehicle would have been wanting to use it for lamping for rabbits or hare or deer, and there were no visible light source coming from it anyway. So we stopped eventually at a seat and set the gear up, and this thing stopped at the back of us. Not really intimidating at this point, and then at some point we were keeping his eye on it, it veered off and disappeared over the other side of the hill. The farmer told me no one was up there and nobody should have been. By now it was getting dark and the corn had been cut, then this will be prominent in what I'm saying. And I said to Bob, that vehicle's coming, Bob. I said, I can hear it. And I could hear it on the stubble, crunching it as it's driving up. And it just loomed out of the darkness, and it had gone down the field, and it stopped 20 foot away from me and Bob, parallel with us, and just sat there. Blacked out windows, and Bob's saying, what shall we do? What shall we do? I said, we can't do nothing. We'll just sit here. And that's what we did, and eventually it just went on its merry way. Now, I think that was some kind of intimidation. It's not a known vehicle. I couldn't get a registration number. Everything was in darkness. Somebody else observing, and a strange one, you know.
It is strange indeed. Paul, we've run out of time, unfortunately. It's the hour goes so quickly when we talk to you. And, it's a pleasure each year to talk to you, and also, I mean, we catch up, don't we, on a regular basis anyway. And what I'd like to do, Paul, before you go, could you just let the listening public know where to find your books, where to find your documentaries, please? Well,
the books can be found on Amazon, and you can visit the Truth Proof page on Facebook, and they can also be purchased via that or via the truthproof.webs.com website. And visit me on Facebook. Anybody who's got any stories to tell, please get in touch. You'll always find a friendly ear from me, and I treat everybody how I expect to be treated.
No, you're a good man, Paul, and thank you so much. Good luck with all the documentaries and the books.
Thank you.
And love to the family. Say hi to Mary for me.
I will do.
Take care, buddy. Have a great
everyone.
Christmas.
Yep, bye-bye.
All the best, mate. Bye-bye now. Well, that was Paul Sinclair. And as always, it was an absolute delight to have him. Thank you for listening, and hopefully the Fright Before Christmas will return next Christmas.